The gunshot tore through the Arizona night like a blade through silk. Ethan Wade was on his feet before his eyes fully opened, hand finding the Colt Navy revolver beneath his pillow with the practiced ease of a man who had survived too many ambushes to count. 39 years on this earth had taught him one truth above all others. Hesitation is the razor-thin line between breathing and bleeding out in the dirt. Through the window of his rough-hewn cabin, flames painted the darkness in shades of orange and crimson. His stable was burning. Ethan yanked on his boots without bothering to lace them, grabbed the Winchester Model 1873 leaning against the doorframe, and crashed through the door into the yard. The heat hit him like a physical blow. Smoke rolled across the hard-packed earth, thick and choking, carrying with it the acrid smell of burning pine and the terrifying screams of horses in mortal panic. Inside that burning structure were Shadow and the gelding, two animals that had carried him across this unforgiving territory for 3 years. Two lives that depended on him now. He ran. The stable door hung open, flames already crawling along the pine rafters overhead like living things hungry and merciless. The temperature inside had to be pushing 800 degrees, maybe more. Sparks showered down like burning rain. Ethan pulled his nightshirt up over his mouth and nose and plunged straight into hell. Shadow, his Morgan mare, reared and thrashed in her stall eyes, rolling white with terror. Her hooves struck the wooden walls with sounds like gunshots. The gelding, an American quarter horse he had never bothered naming, with fear, throwing himself against the gate. Ethan grabbed Shadow's halter with both hands. The leather was hot enough to burn. He spoke low and steady, using the voice he had perfected during 4 years of war, the voice that could calm a mount under cannon fire. Shadow fought him for 3 terrible seconds. Then something in his tone, some quality of certainty in the face of chaos, reached through her panic. She followed. The gelding came next, bolting past Ethan on pure instinct, nearly trampling him in his desperation to escape. They burst out of the stable together, man and animals gasping and wild-eyed. Behind them, the roof groaned like a dying man and then collapsed in a fountain of sparks and burning timber. Ethan stood in his yard chest, heaving sweat and soot streaking his face in equal measure. He watched everything he had built over 3 years turn to ash and ember. The stable had cost him $150 to construct. The tack inside another, $75. 2 tons of hay, $30 more. In the space of 20 minutes, a third of his annual income had gone up in smoke. This was no lightning strike, no careless lantern. Someone had done this with purpose and forethought. That was when he spotted it. A piece of paper nailed to a fence post, its edges already curling from the heat. He crossed the yard in 4 long strides and ripped it free. The words seemed to glow in the firelight, written in bold black letters that left no room for misunderstanding. Wade, you owe me a life. I will take everything first, then take you. S.G. The initials hit him like a fist to the chest. Samuel Griffin, the name he had spent 14 years trying to forget. The name that had haunted his dreams and turned his marriage into a graveyard of silence and unspoken grief. The smell of gunpowder residue, still clinging to the note, triggered something in his mind, a door he had kept locked for more than a decade. Memory flooded back, sharp and unwanted as broken glass cutting flesh. July 1863, Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. The second day of fighting. He had been 25 years old then. Sergeant Ethan Wade, 1st United States Sharpshooters, Berdan's Regiment. His job was simple but brutal. Find Confederate officers through his rifle scope, put them down, disrupt enemy command. He was terrifyingly good at it. Through the Sharps rifle's telescopic sight, the world narrowed to circles and crosshairs. He could see individual buttons on uniforms at 200 yards, could read the fear in men's eyes at distances that should have rendered them anonymous. On that sweltering Pennsylvania afternoon, with the temperature pushing 78 degrees and a light wind from the northwest, he had spotted a young Confederate captain rallying his troops. The man was perhaps 23, standing tall in the chaos, sword raised, high voice hoarse from shouting orders. The 4th Georgia Infantry was falling back under withering Union fire, and this captain was trying to hold them together with nothing but courage and conviction. Ethan had steadied his breath, calculated the wind, adjusted for elevation. The distance was 287 yards by his estimate. The captain stood in profile, perfect target. Ethan squeezed the trigger. The recoil was familiar, comforting even. Through the scope, he watched the captain crumple like a puppet with cut strings. One shot, one kill, one more ghost to carry. For just a moment before turning away, Ethan had seen a younger man, barely more than a mile, running to the fallen officer's side, screaming, cradling the dead man's head. That image had lasted only seconds before Ethan swung his rifle to find the next target. He had learned the captain's name later from captured documents. Daniel Griffin. The younger brother's name had been Samuel. Now standing in his Arizona yard with the smell of smoke thick in his lungs and the note crumpling in his fist, Ethan understood. Samuel Griffin had spent 14 years hunting the man who killed his brother, and now he was here. Sleep did not come that night. Ethan sat on his porch with the Winchester across his knees, watching the embers cool, waiting for an attack that never arrived. Samuel was playing a longer game. He wanted Ethan to suffer first, to lose everything slowly, piece by piece, before dying. When dawn broke harsh and bright over the Superstition Mountains, painting the mesa in shades of copper and gold, Ethan was hauling charred timber from the stable ruins when he heard horses approaching from the south. His hand dropped instinctively to the revolver at his hip. A black lacquered carriage rolled up the dirt road flanked by 4 riders, hard men with harder eyes, professional guns for hire. The carriage alone had cost someone $800 more than most men in the territory earned in a year. The men riding alongside carried Winchester repeaters and wore Colt peacemakers on their hips, with the casual confidence of those who knew how to use them. The carriage door swung open. Out stepped Clayton Drummond. Drummond was 60 years old with silver hair and the cold patience of a coiled rattlesnake. He owned more land than any man in 3 counties. 47,000 acres if the rumors were true, 8,000 head of cattle, mining interests in silver and copper. He employed 120 men and had his fingers in every business from Redemption Creek to the territorial border. He surveyed the smoking ruins of Ethan's stable with theatrical concern. Hartley, he paused, studying the damage. Wade, forgive me. What a tragedy. Simply terrible. Ethan leaned on his shovel. He did not bother with pleasantries. There was no point. Men like Drummond did not make social calls to struggling homesteaders at dawn. I will be direct, Drummond continued, producing a folded document from his coat. The paper was crisp and official looking. I want to buy your land. This is a fair offer. Enough for you to start over somewhere else, somewhere safer. Ethan took the paper. The number written there was $400. His 160 acres claimed under the Homestead Act at $1.25,000. Probably $1,200 to the right buyer. Drummond was offering less than half. Not interested. Drummond's smile thinned like ice over deep water. Think carefully, Mr. Wade. A man alone out here. These are dangerous times. Accidents happen. Fires. He gestured at the ruined stable. Poisoned wells. Cattle that wander off and never return. He spread his hands in mock helplessness. I would hate to see more misfortune befall you. The 4 riders shifted in their saddles. Hands drifted toward holstered pistols. The message was clear. Accept the offer or face the consequences. Get off my land, Ethan said quietly. For a moment, genuine surprise flickered across Drummond's face. Men did not refuse Clayton Drummond in this territory. The sheriff was on his payroll at $200 a month. The territorial judge received $500 every quarter. Drummond owned the law and he knew it. The riders tensed. One of them, a thick-necked man with a tobacco-stained beard, moved his hand closer to his gun. Drummond raised one finger and they stilled, like hunting dogs called to heel. You will regret this, Wade. Everyone does eventually. The carriage turned and rolled away, leaving a cloud of dust hanging in the morning air, like a question mark. Ethan watched until it vanished over the ridge. He knew men like Drummond. They did not make idle threats. They made promises, and they always collected. The afternoon sun hung low and heavy when the next blow fell. Ethan was checking his well, a hand-dug shaft 40 feet deep with limestone walls, when he noticed the water looked cloudy. Unusual. The spring that fed this well had run clear since the day he had first claimed this land. Near the water trough, 2 of his cattle lay dead, foam crusted around their mouths, eyes bloodshot and staring. He knelt beside the nearest one and saw the telltale white powder residue on its muzzle. Arsenic. Someone had dumped white arsenic into his well during the night. The poison was cheap, just $2 a pound, and brutally effective. 1 to 4 grams could kill a full-grown steer. Whoever had done this had used at least a pound enough to contaminate 500 gallons of water. Ethan did the math with the cold precision of a man who had learned early that survival was about numbers and planning. 2 head of cattle at $18 each. $36 lost. The well would need to be cleaned, possibly relined. More expense. More time. The war of attrition had begun. The second day brought fresh cruelty. Morning inspection revealed 4 sections of his barbed wire fence cut clean through. Each section was 220 feet long, a full furlong divided by 8. The wire itself had only been invented in 1874, and replacing it was expensive. But that was not the worst part. 18 of his cattle had scattered across 5 miles of scrubland through the gaps. Ethan spent the entire day rounding them up from 6 in the morning until 7 at night. His body, 39 years old and carrying an old war wound in his right shoulder, ached with every movement. The shoulder always hurt worse when he was tired or stressed. Today, it felt like someone was driving a hot spike through the joint with every breath. By the time the sun set, he had recovered only 14 head. 4 were still missing. At $20 per animal, that was another $72 gone. Added to the stable, the tack, the hay, the poisoned cattle, and he was looking at losses over $360, more than half his annual income. That night, sitting at his rough wooden table with his ledger book open before him, Ethan confronted the numbers with the same unflinching honesty that had kept him alive through 4 years of war. Income year-to-date, $640 from 16 cattle, sold at $20 each, plus a handful of odd jobs. Losses from sabotage, $363. Remaining capital, $277. Winter was 4 months away. He would need at least $200 to survive until spring. The arithmetic was brutal and simple. He could not afford another major attack. On the third day, a lone rider appeared on the ridge overlooking his property. Ethan spotted the figure through his old field glasses' 8-power magnification that brought the world into sharp but narrow focus. The rider sat motionless at a distance of roughly 800 yards. Ethan's old killing range from the war. He counted the minutes, 73 in total. The rider never moved, never approached, just sat astride his horse like a statue carved from shadow and threat. Then, without warning or explanation, the man turned and vanished over the ridge. The message was clearer than any spoken words. You are never safe. We are always watching. We can reach you whenever we want. Ethan stood in his yard long after the rider had gone, feeling the weight of isolation settle over him like a shroud. His nearest neighbor was 8 miles away. The town of Redemption Creek was 12 miles to the east. Out here, a man could die and not be found for weeks, months if someone wanted it that way. That was when he heard it. The sound of gunshots, sharp and desperate. Then horse hooves pounding hard across the desert floor at full gallop. Ethan grabbed his Winchester and moved to the fence line. A rider was coming fast from the east, pushing their mount beyond its limits. The horse's sides were lathered with foam, its breathing audible even at 100 yards. Behind the fleeing rider, 4 men gave chase. As the distance closed, Ethan recognized the pursuers. Drummond's men. The leader was Frank Gaines, the tobacco-bearded man from the carriage. The others were cut from the same cloth. Hard men who did hard work for hard money. The fleeing rider drew closer. A woman, patchy judging by her clothing and the way she sat her horse like she had been born in the saddle. Her black hair streamed behind her like a banner. Her paint horse was magnificent, all muscle and speed, but it had been running too long, too hard. It was nearly finished. She was heading straight for Ethan's property. He did not think, did not weigh consequences or calculate odds. He saw the terror in her eyes and the determination in the set of her jaw, and something in him responded before his mind caught up. He stepped into the open ground between fence posts, raised his Winchester, and planted himself directly in the path of pursuit. The woman's horse thundered past him so close, he felt the wind of its passage and smelled the acrid mix of horse sweat and human fear. She hauled back on the reins, spinning the lathered animal around in a spray of dirt and stones. For one moment, their eyes met. Hers were dark as polished obsidian, filled with fear and defiance and desperate hope in equal measure. Drummond's men slowed to a stop, spreading into a loose line 30 yards out. 4 against 1. They had rifles and revolvers. Ethan had his Winchester and the high ground of moral certainty. Frank Gaines spat tobacco juice into the dust. "Move aside, Wade. That squaw belongs to Mr. Drummond." Ethan raised his rifle, sighting down the barrel with the easy confidence of a man who had made impossible shots under worse conditions. At this distance, 30 yards, he could not miss. Not with this weapon. The Winchester Model 1873 had a 24-inch barrel, held 15 rounds, plus one in the chamber, and was effective out to 300 yards. Here now, it might as well have been a hand cannon. "Nobody belongs to anybody," Ethan said quietly. "Not on my land." "This ain't about your land," Gaines shot back. "Mr. Drummond wants her back. You best step aside. Tell Drummond he can come get her himself." One of the other riders, younger than the rest, leaned toward Gaines and whispered something. Ethan caught only fragments. "That's Wade, the one from the war. Killed 40 rebels. Never misses." The numbers were close enough to truth. 37 confirmed kills during his time as a sharpshooter. Accuracy rate of 98%. The reputation had followed him west like a shadow he could not shake. Gaines calculated odds with the cold arithmetic of a professional. 4 against 1 should be easy. But Wade would drop 2, maybe 3 of them before they could return effective fire. Those were bad odds when you were one of the 4. "This ain't over, Wade." "Probably not," Ethan agreed. The 4 riders turned and retreated toward Drummond's holdings to the south. Ethan kept his rifle raised until they were specks against the fading sky. Only then did he lower the weapon and turn to the woman. She had dismounted. Up close, she was perhaps 28, with high cheekbones and eyes that held both strength and wariness. She kept a distance of 10 feet between them, ready to run if needed. The silence stretched. Ethan waited. He had learned long ago that sometimes the best thing to say was nothing at all. She spoke first. Her English was perfect, barely touched by accent. "They will return." "I know." More silence. She studied him with the intensity of someone trying to read a book in a language they were still learning. "Why did you help me?" Ethan considered the question. He did not have a clean answer. Maybe he was tired of watching men like Drummond take whatever they wanted. Maybe something in her desperate flight reminded him of his own running, the way he had fled Pennsylvania after the war. Fled his grief, fled himself. Seemed like the right thing to do. She studied him for a long moment. "You are the man who lives alone, the ghost who speaks to no one. Everyone in my tribe knows of you." "That's so. They say you came here 3 years ago and never left. Never go to town except for supplies. Never speak to neighbors. Never smile." She paused. "They say you are waiting to die." The accuracy of the observation struck deeper than Ethan wanted to admit. He had come to Arizona territory to forget, to disappear, maybe in some dark corner of his heart to stop existing without the mess and sin of putting a gun to his own head. The sun was lowering now, the temperature already dropping. Arizona desert, 90 degrees in daylight, 50 at night. The woman's horse was still lathered, breathing hard, in desperate need of water and grain. Her own face was bruised on the left side, and she favored her right ankle. Ethan gestured toward the well. "Your horse needs tending." She nodded slowly. "As do I." It was not much, not friendship or even trust. Just a practical alliance born of necessity and mutual need. But it was a beginning. They worked in silence as the sun set. Ethan drew fresh water from the well, the clean water from the deeper levels below the arsenic contamination. The woman tended to her horse with practiced efficiency, checking hooves, examining the animal's breathing, murmuring soft words in Apache. When the horse was settled, she finally turned her attention to her own injuries. "I am called Sarah Blackwater," she said, washing her face with careful movements that spoke of pain held in check. "Ethan Wade." "I know. Your reputation travels far, Mr. Wade." "It's just Ethan." She looked at him again with that same measuring gaze. "Very well, Ethan." The formal barrier. They were no longer strangers meeting by accident. They were two people who had chosen, however tentatively, to acknowledge each other's existence. As darkness fell, and Ethan lit a lantern inside the cabin, Sarah told her story in short, measured sentences. She was the daughter of her tribe's medicine man, a figure of great influence among their people. Her father had raised her to know the old ways, healing songs, the sacred bond between the Apache and their land. When Drummond had discovered silver deposits in the mountains where her people had lived for generations, he had needed them gone. But the Apache refused to abandon the graves of their ancestors, the places where their spirits dwelt. So Drummond had taken Sarah, a hostage, leveraged to force her father's hand. She had been held in Drummond's compound for nearly a month, watched constantly, moved from room to room like a chess piece. Then during a supply delivery, her guard had grown careless. She had stolen a paint horse from the stable and run. Drummond wants the silver, she said, firelight flickering across her face. He will kill anyone who stands in his way. My people. You. Anyone. Ethan listened without interrupting. He had known men like Drummond during the war. Officers who saw soldiers as numbers on a ledger, acceptable losses in pursuit of objectives. Human life measured only by its usefulness. You should not have helped me, Sarah continued. Now you are marked. He will come for you. He was already coming, Ethan replied. This just moves up the timeline. They fell into a different kind of silence then. Not uncomfortable, but weighted with shared understanding. Both of them knew what was coming. Violence, blood, possibly death. The only question was when and how. Sarah slept in the cabin's single room that night, while Ethan took watch on the porch. The Winchester rested across his knees, familiar as his own hands. The night sky above was vast and littered with stars, so many that they seemed to blur together into a river of light flowing from horizon to horizon. He thought about Emily. His wife had died 5 years ago, consumption taking her slowly over the course of 8 months. Tuberculosis, the doctor had called it. A death sentence delivered with professional sympathy and a bill for $30. Ethan had watched her waste away, helpless to stop it, all his wartime survival skills rendered useless against an enemy he could not see or shoot. Emily would have known what to say right now. She always had. Even during the worst days after his return from the war, when the nightmares kept him awake and the guilt made him silent, she had found words to bridge the distance between them. He had failed her by building walls she could not climb. And then she had died before he could tear those walls down. A man's worth isn't in his land, Ethan, she had told him once near the end. It's in what he's willing to stand for. He had not understood then, had not wanted to. Now sitting alone in the darkness with a woman he barely knew, sleeping in his cabin and enemies gathering in the shadows, he thought perhaps he was beginning to grasp what she had meant. Dawn broke cold and clear. Ethan was checking the perimeter when he heard a rider approaching from the west. Old instincts flared. His hand found the revolver at his hip. Then he saw who it was and relaxed fractionally. William Thornton, old Bill of People called him, though never to his face. 67 years old, weathered as sun-bleached leather, with a white beard and 2 fingers missing from his left hand, courtesy of a Comanche arrow in 1851. He rode a mule instead of a horse, claiming mules had sense horses did not. Bill had served with Ethan's father in the Mexican War back in 1846, had known Ethan since childhood, had been the one to teach him to shoot at age 12, handing him a rifle and saying, "A gun is a tool, like a hammer or saw. You use it when needed, not because you can." Bill dismounted stiffly, age showing in the careful way he favored his left hip. His eyes took in the burned stable, the poisoned well, the tension in Ethan's shoulders. "Heard you had trouble," Bill said without preamble. News travels fast. In a territory this empty, everything travels fast. Bill tied his mule to the fence. Drummond, among others. Bill nodded as if this confirmed something he had already suspected. "Your daddy would have been proud you came back from that war, son. A lot of boys didn't." The words hit harder than Ethan expected. His father had died when Ethan was 16, crushed beneath a falling tree during a logging accident. Quick and brutal, the kind of death the frontier specialized in. Ethan had enlisted 3 years later, more to escape grief than from any particular patriotic fervor. "I'm not sure pride is the right word," Ethan said quietly. "I killed 23 men in 2 wars. Bill replied, his voice steady and matter-of-fact. "Not proud, not ashamed, just done. But each one stays with you, doesn't he?" "Yes." "How do you live with it?" Bill was quiet for a long moment, gazing out at the mesa. "You don't fight the ghosts, son. You make room for them. They're part of you now, always will be." It was the most direct anyone had ever addressed Ethan's war service. Most people avoided the subject, as if discussing it might somehow contaminate them with his experiences. Bill's blunt honesty was like cool water on a burn. Sarah emerged from the cabin, then moving carefully on her injured ankle. Bill's demeanor shifted immediately, became more formal, respectful. He spoke to her in Apache, the words flowing easily despite his age. Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. Bill said something else in Apache. Sarah replied, her tone cautious but warming. Then she smiled, the first genuine smile Ethan had seen from her. "You knew my grandfather?" she asked in English. "White Eagle? Fine man. We smoked pipe together once back in '52. He told me stories about when the Spanish first came. Said his grandmother had seen them. That makes your family's memory stretch back more than 300 years in this land." Sarah's smile faded into something more complex, pride mixed with sorrow. "Yes, 300 years. And now a white man wants to erase us in 3 months." "Not if I have anything to say about it," Bill said. Then to Ethan, "The boy, Tommy, Sarah's nephew, he's hiding in the foothills." Ethan looked at Sarah. She nodded. "He escaped with me, but we were separated. He is only 14. Alone out there." "Coyote Canyon," Bill said with certainty. "Good hiding spots. Water source. If I were a scared kid, that's where I'd go." They began planning immediately. The canyon was 6 miles northeast, rocky terrain, good for hiding, but dangerous for a boy alone. Drummond's men would likely be patrolling, looking for Sarah, and now probably searching for the nephew as well. Bill would guide them. Ethan would provide the firepower. Sarah would stay behind her ankle, too injured for the rough country. She protested, but Bill's logic was unarguable. A wounded person would slow them down and potentially get them all killed. Before they left, Bill pulled Ethan aside. His voice dropped to a near whisper. "That boy out there, he ain't just Sarah's nephew. He's the future. Men like us, we're the past son. What matters is what we leave behind." Ethan wanted to argue, to point out that he had nothing to leave behind. No children, no legacy. Just 160 acres of hard land and a cabin that would probably be burned down by Drummond's men within the month. But Bill continued before he could speak. "You don't have anything to leave behind, not yet, but you got time to build it. Question is, will you?" They rode out at first light, two men on a rescue mission into country that wanted them dead. The foothills rose like broken teeth against the sky, all rock and scrub, brush and saguaro cacti that had taken 150 years to grow 30 feet tall. Ethan's shoulder ached with the cold and the stress. The old war wound from Chancellorsville in 1863, a mini-ball that had shattered bone and left fragments the surgeon could not extract. It hurt worse when he was tired or afraid. Today it hurt like fire. Bill rode ahead, reading the land with the skill of a man who had spent 50 years learning to see what others missed. He pointed out signs Ethan would have walked past. A broken creosote branch here. A boot print child-sized in soft sand there. Disturbed rocks arranged in a pattern that spoke of panicked flight. "Track doesn't just show where someone went," Bill explained, falling back into the role of teacher he had occupied during Ethan's childhood. "Shows how they felt. These prints, panicked, running scared, boys terrified." They found the natural spring in Coyote Canyon 2 hours after sunrise. Clear water flowing at about 2 gallons per minute, pooling in a basin worn smooth by centuries of use. Tommy would need water. Had probably been out here 36 hours without proper food or shelter. Then Ethan heard voices. He signaled Bill to stop. They dismounted, tied their horses to stunted trees, and moved forward on foot. Two of Drummond's riders sat their horses near the canyon entrance, talking in the casual way of men who thought themselves alone and safe. "Drummond wants that kid alive," one said. "Leverage against the tribe." "What about Wade?" "Boss says Griffin gets Wade. We just make sure he's isolated." The words confirmed what Ethan had feared. Samuel Griffin was not just here for revenge. He was working with Drummond. Personal vendetta and business combined into something far more dangerous than either alone. Bill touched Ethan's arm, pointed up the canyon wall. 40 feet above them, barely visible in the shadows of an overhang, was a small cave. Ethan caught a flicker of movement. The boy. They waited until the riders moved on, then Bill called up in Apache. At first there was no response. Then a small face appeared, thin and frightened. Bill spoke again, his voice gentle. The boy responded, words tumbling out too fast for Ethan to follow, even if he had understood the language. Bill kept his tone steady, reassuring. Slowly, Tommy began to climb down. He was 14, but looked younger, malnutrition and fear having stripped him down to bone and sinew. His hands trembled as Bill helped him the last few feet. He stared at Ethan with open suspicion. Bill spoke in Apache again. Tommy replied, his voice barely above a whisper. He asked if you are a soldier, Bill translated. Ethan hesitated. The question carried weight he was not sure how to bear. Finally, he said, I was, a long time ago. Bill translated. Tommy asked another question. He wants to know what is better than being a soldier. Bill said something like amusement touching his weathered features. Ethan looked at the boy, this child who had lost his parents and been hunted across the desert like an animal. He thought about the 37 men he had killed, about Daniel Griffin falling under his bullet, about all the choices that had led him here to this moment. A man who builds instead of destroys, Ethan said quietly. Bill translated. Tommy considered this for a long moment, then nodded as if Ethan had passed some test the boy had not known he was administering. They were a mile from Ethan's property when Bill spotted the dust cloud. 4 riders coming fast from the south. The same men who had chased Sarah. The same men who wanted Tommy. The math was simple and brutal. Ethan and Bill could fight, but Tommy was weak, could not run far or fast. If they were caught in the open, the boy would die. Bill made the decision without hesitation. You two go, I'll lead them off. Bill, you cannot. I'm 67 years old, son. You're 39. You got 28 more years to make a difference. I've had my time. Bill was already turning his mule, checking his rifle. Get that boy home. Ethan wanted to argue, wanted to find some other solution, but Bill fired a shot into the air before he could speak, then kicked his mule into a run, heading south. The riders saw him immediately and gave chase. Ethan grabbed Tommy and ran. They reached the property 15 minutes later, both breathing hard. Sarah came out of the cabin at a run. Despite her bad ankle, swept Tommy into her arms, held him like she would never let go. The boy buried his face in her shoulder and wept. 3 hours passed. Ethan stood watch with his Winchester, preparing for the worst. Then Bill appeared on the ridge to the north, his mule barely winded, a grin splitting his weathered face. Led them in circles, through prickly, pear cactus, thick as hair on a dog's back, he said, dismounting. They'll be picking needles out their backsides till Christmas. That night, the 4 of them sat together in the small cabin. Sarah tended Tommy's cuts and bruises, while Bill told stories from the Mexican War in a voice that made history come alive. Ethan found himself almost smiling, something he had not done in longer than he could remember. As Sarah tucked Tommy into a bedroll, she said something that changed everything. Drummond keeps all his illegal papers in his office. Bank fraud, forged deeds, murder contracts. I saw them during my captivity. If those documents reached the territorial governor, Drummond would be finished. The words hung in the air like smoke. Bill and Ethan exchanged glances. An idea was forming, dangerous and desperate, but possible. Before they could discuss it further, Ethan needed supplies, information, help. The next day, he rode into Redemption Creek 12 miles to the east. 2 hours in the saddle gave him time to think, to plan, to prepare for what was coming. Redemption Creek was not much of a town. Population 340, Main Street 600 feet long. 12 businesses, half of them owned outright by Clayton Drummond. The other half paid him rent or tribute or whatever name they chose to give extortion. The general store owner, Henry Walsh, would not meet Ethan's eyes. I cannot serve you, Wade. Mr. Drummond's orders. The blacksmith, Otto Schmidt, suddenly had no time to shoe Ethan's horse despite an empty forge and no customers. The bank froze his account pending review that would never come. Everywhere he went, doors closed. Conversations stopped. He had become invisible, erased from the community by Drummond's word alone. The only exception was the Chinese laundry run by the Chen family. They had arrived during the gold rush in the 1850s and survived 3 decades through hard work and stubborn refusal to disappear. Mrs. Chen gave Ethan food wrapped in brown paper and said nothing. But her eyes spoke volumes. She knew what it meant to be hated for no reason other than existing. Ethan was leaving when a voice called from the alley beside the saloon. Wade, over here. His hand dropped to his revolver. He stepped into the shadows between buildings. A man leaned against the wall, rolling a cigarette with practiced ease. Tall and weathered, with the mixed Apache and Mexican features common to men who lived in the spaces between cultures. A tin star was pinned to his coat. United States Marshals Commission bounty hunter. Recognition struck like lightning. Jack Redhawk. They had served in different units during the war but had crossed paths enough times to build respect. The debt between them was simple and absolute. At Antietam in September 1862, Ethan had pulled Jack from a river while bullets churned the water to foam. Jack had taken a Confederate ball through the left leg and was drowning when Ethan grabbed him by the collar and dragged him to shore. "Been a long time, Sergeant," Jack said with a grin. They clasped hands like brothers reunited after years apart. Jack filled him in quickly. He had been tracking a horse thief out of Tucson when the trail went cold. While asking around, he had heard about a $500 bounty on an Apache woman, and another $200 for anyone helping her. "Imagine my surprise," Jack said, lighting his cigarette, "when I hear Drummond has hired a man named Samuel Griffin, professional, dangerous, been asking questions about you, where you served, what battles." The news settled in Ethan's gut like cold stone. What does he know? Everything, Gettysburg especially. He knows about that shot you took, the captain you killed. Jack's expression turned serious. "I spent 10 years hunting the men who murdered my father. Found them all. Killed them all. You know what I got?" He paused. "Empty. I got empty. Revenge doesn't fill the hole, hermano. It just makes it darker." They talked for an hour. Jack had scouted Drummond's ranch. 22 armed men, main house built like a fortress, adobe construction, reinforced doors. The office on the second floor east wing, safe weighing 500 pounds, Mosler steel nearly impossible to crack. But there was a weakness. Shift change at dawn, 6 in the morning. Guards tired from the night, watchday crew not yet fully alert. A 10-minute window when the entire operation ran on autopilot. "Griffin is not just muscle," Jack warned. "Drummond trusts him. Some say Griffin's planning something big." The pieces were falling into place. Samuel wanted Ethan destroyed slowly. Drummond wanted his land and Sarah's tribe removed. Together they were far more dangerous than apart. That night back at the ranch, they made the plan. Sarah knew the layout. Jack could create a diversion. Ethan would provide cover fire. The objective was not violence but evidence. Documents that would bring Drummond down legally rather than through bloodshed. Bill listened to it all, then said quietly, "Sometimes the bravest thing isn't fighting. It's knowing when to walk away." "And if walking away means others get hurt," Ethan asked. "Then you already know your answer, son. I just wanted to make sure you chose it freely." They prepared for 2 days. Black powder for Jack's diversion, 5 pounds at $12. Rope, 100 feet of hemp, $3. Spare ammunition, 100 rounds of .44, $48. The total cost was $23, nearly 10% of Ethan's remaining capital. Everything was ready. They would move at dawn. Sarah would surrender herself to get inside, then locate the documents and signal when ready. Jack would create chaos with an explosion. Ethan would cover the escape. It was desperate, probably doomed, but it was all they had. The evening before the raid, Ethan was checking his fences when he saw a rider approaching from the east. Alone, moving slowly, deliberately. He grabbed his Winchester and waited. The rider stopped 30 yards out, dismounted, stood with his hands visible away from his weapons. Even in the failing light, Ethan could make out the scar running down the left side of the man's face like a dried riverbed. Samuel Griffin had come. The man was perhaps 35, gaunt and weathered beyond his years. They faced each other across 30 yards of hard-packed earth. Two men who had never met but knew each other with the terrible intimacy of hunter and prey. The silence stretched thin as wire. Finally, Samuel spoke. "You know who I am." "I know." "You know what I want." "I know." More silence. The wind blew dust between them. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote raised its voice in a howl that sounded like grief made audible. "He was 23 years old," Samuel said. His voice was steady, but Ethan heard the fractures beneath. "Just 23. I was 25, Ethan replied. "Didn't make it easier." Samuel took a step forward. "Do you even remember his face?" The question cut deeper than any knife. Ethan could have lied. Should have, perhaps. But something in him had broken open over these past days and lies no longer seemed to fit. "Every night," he said quietly. "His and 36 others." Samuel stopped as if struck. "You remember them? How could I forget?" The admission hung between them. Samuel had expected denial, justification, maybe even pride. Not this raw confession of guilt carried for 14 years. I was a soldier. Ethan continued, the words coming faster now, like poison being drawn from a wound. Good at killing. They gave me medals for it, called me a hero, but every man I killed was someone's son, someone's brother, maybe someone's father. He paused. Daniel was your brother. That makes him real. They're all real to me now. That's supposed to make me forgive you. No, nothing can do that. I'm just answering your question. Samuel stood very still. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, become smaller, more human. Drummond promised me your head. Then I found letters, orders to eliminate Griffin after Wade is dead. Eliminate the witness. Ethan felt something shift in his chest. Samuel continued. We're both his tools. Difference is, I figured it out. He looked up, met Ethan's eyes directly. I still hate you. That won't change. I understand. But I hate Drummond more. He used my brother's death, made it about land and money, made Daniel's sacrifice cheap. What are you saying? Samuel climbed back onto his horse. I'm saying I won't stop you tomorrow. And I won't help Drummond. He gathered the reins. After that, we'll see. He rode away without looking back, disappearing into the gathering darkness. Ethan stood alone, feeling the weight of the encounter settle over him like a blanket. Behind him, he heard Sarah approach. Can we trust him? She asked. Ethan watched the place where Samuel had vanished. I don't know, but we're out of choices. That night, sleep was impossible. Ethan sat on the porch with Bill, both men keeping vigil under stars so numerous they seemed to merge into rivers of light. Your daddy used to say something, Bill said softly. A man's legacy isn't what he takes, it's what he gives. I remember. Tomorrow you'll either die or become someone different. Either way, the man you were ends. Bill turned to look at him. Question is, who do you want to become? Ethan had no answer, not yet, but he felt something stirring inside him, something that had been dormant for 5 years, since Emily's death, since he had fled to this desert to die slowly instead of all at once. Hope, fragile as a moth's wing, terrifying as a loaded gun, but there. Dawn would come soon, and with it violence or redemption, perhaps both. He checked his Winchester one more time. 15 rounds in the magazine, one in the chamber, enough to change the world or end his own. Time would tell which. The mesa stretched before him, vast and ancient and utterly indifferent to human struggles. Men had fought and died on this land for thousands of years, would continue to do so long after Ethan Wade was dust in memory. But tomorrow, for a brief moment, he would matter, would stand for something beyond survival, would choose to build instead of destroy. Bill's words echoed in his mind, what we leave behind, the future. Tommy sleeping inside Sarah, tending her nephew Jack Redhawk, riding through the night to position himself for the raid. A family forming from the broken pieces of broken people. Ethan Wade had come to Arizona to disappear. Instead, against all odds and expectations, he was beginning to appear. The first light touched the eastern horizon. Dawn. The raid. Everything balanced on the edge of a knife. He stood and walked inside to wake the others. Time to see what kind of man he would choose to become. Morning came with Sarah's scream. Ethan was on his feet before the sound fully registered, revolver in hand, heart hammering against his ribs. He burst through the cabin door to find Sarah sitting upright on her bedroll, eyes wide and unseeing, still trapped in whatever nightmare had seized her in sleep. Tommy was already at her side, small hands gripping her shoulders, speaking in rapid Apache. Bill stood near the window, rifle ready, scanning for external threats before realizing the danger was internal. Memory, trauma, the kind of wounds that left no visible scars. Sarah's breathing slowed, her eyes focused. She saw the 3 men staring at her with varying degrees of concern and looked away ashamed. I am sorry, she said, voice barely above a whisper. I did not mean to wake everyone. Nothing to apologize for, Bill said gruffly, setting his rifle aside. We all got our ghosts. But Sarah would not meet anyone's gaze. She stood, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, despite the growing warmth of the day, and walked out onto the porch. Ethan followed after a moment, giving her space but offering presence. She stood watching the sunrise paint the mesa in shades of amber and rose. Her hands trembled slightly where they gripped the blanket. It was the room, she said finally, the one where Drummond kept me. Small, no windows, just walls and darkness and waiting. Ethan said nothing. Sometimes silence was the only appropriate response to pain. Every day he would come, Sarah continued, her voice taking on the flat quality of someone reciting facts to avoid feeling them. Never touched me, did not need to, just talked. About my father, about my people, about how they were starving while I sat in comfort. She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Comfort, four walls and a locked door, and the constant fear that today would be the day he stopped needing me alive. But you got out, Ethan said quietly. I got out. She turned to look at him, and brought my trouble to your door. Drummond will not forget this, will not forgive it. I know. Then why? The question held genuine confusion. You do not know me. You do not know my people. Why risk everything? Ethan thought about the question, about Emily, who had asked him similar things during the dark months after his return from war. Why do you pull away? Why won't you let me help? Why do you act like you're already dead? He had not had good answers then. Maybe he did now. I know what it is like to carry weight you did not ask for, he said, to feel like you are drowning in other people's choices. He paused. Maybe I am tired of watching people suffer for things they did not do. Sarah studied him for a long moment. Something in her expression shifted, softened. You are not what I expected. What did you expect? The stories say you are a ghost, a man who killed without feeling, without conscience. She shook her head. But ghosts do not rescue people. Ghosts do not risk their lives for strangers. Before Ethan could respond, Bill's voice called from inside. Got coffee on, and we need to talk. They gathered around the rough table, Tommy still half asleep, Sarah composed again. Bill looking older in the morning light than he had the day before. Ethan poured coffee into tin cups and waited. The boy needs teaching, Bill said without preamble. Not just survival, but why to survive. What to build when the fighting's done. Tommy looked up at that, suddenly alert. Sarah started to speak, but Bill raised a hand. I've been thinking about legacy, Bill continued. I am 67 years old. Not much time left. Maybe a few years if I am lucky. He looked at Ethan. Your daddy taught you to shoot. I taught you to track. But neither of us taught you why it mattered. Why a man builds instead of just takes. Built by him, Ethan began, uncomfortable with the direction this was heading. Let me finish. Bill's voice was gentle but firm. That boy lost his parents, but he has got 3 people here who can give him something better than what was taken. Sarah teaches him where he came from. You teach him how to stand. I teach him why it matters. He turned to Tommy, switched to Apache. The boy listened, eyes growing wider. When Bill finished, Tommy looked at each of them in turn, then nodded slowly. What did you tell him? Ethan asked. That we are his family now, if he wants us. Bill sipped his coffee. He said yes. The weight of that simple statement settled over the cabin like snow. Family. The word felt foreign to Ethan. He had lost his father at 16, lost Emily 5 years ago, had spent the years since then deliberately avoiding any attachments that might lead to more loss. Now here was this boy, this stranger's child, and an old man was claiming him as kin, claiming Ethan as kin too in the process. I will teach him to shoot, Ethan heard himself say, not to kill, but to protect what matters. Sarah's hand found his across the table. Brief contact quickly withdrawn, but the message clear. Thank you. They spent the morning in practical tasks. Bill took Tommy out to teach him basic tracking, reading the earth for signs of passage. Sarah prepared food from the supplies Ethan had managed to gather, creating something nourishing from very little. Ethan repaired fence line and tried not to think about what was coming, but his mind would not quiet. The raid on Drummond's compound loomed like a thunderhead on the horizon. Sarah would have to surrender herself, walk back into captivity on nothing but faith that Ethan and Jack could extract her before Drummond realized what was happening. The margin for error was non-existent. Around noon, Bill returned with Tommy. The boy was limping slightly, but grinning. He held up 3 fingers. 3 rabbits. Bill translated, pride evident in his voice. Tracked and snared them without help. Natural talent. Tommy beamed under the praise. Sarah embraced him, and Ethan saw the fierce, protective love in her eyes. This boy was everything to her. The last link to family, to heritage, to a future worth fighting for. That afternoon, Bill sat Ethan down on the porch while Sarah and Tommy worked in the small garden plot behind the cabin. You look at her different than you did 3 days ago, Bill observed. Ethan did not bother denying it. I barely know her. Love is not about time, son. It is about recognition. Bill packed tobacco into a pipe with his three-fingered hand movements, practiced and sure. You recognize in her what you need. She sees in you what she lost. It is too soon. Emily has only been gone 5 years. Emily has been gone 5 years, Bill corrected gently. She would want you living, not haunting your own life. He lit the pipe, drew deeply. I lost my Margaret in '58. Cholera. Took her in 3 days. Left me with a boy to raise alone. Ethan had known Bill lost his wife but had never heard the full story. What happened to your son, Antietam? September 17th, 1862. Same day you pulled Jack Redhawk out of that river. Bill's voice remained steady, but something flickered in his eyes. He was 19. Took a canister shot to the chest. Died before he hit the ground. The numbers aligned in Ethan's head. Bill had been at Antietam, had lost his only child there, had never mentioned it in all the years since. I am sorry, Ethan said inadequately. I am too. Every day. Bill exhaled smoke toward the mesa. But here is what I learned. Grief is not something you get over. It is something you get through. You make room for it. You let it change you. And then you decide what kind of man walks out the other side. What kind of man did you become? Bill smiled, sad and wise and thoroughly human. One who knows that family is not about blood. It is about who you would die for, who you would live for, who you choose. The words settled into Ethan's chest like seeds in fertile ground. He thought about Tommy's grin, about Sarah's hand on his, about Bill's patient teaching, about Jack Redhawk riding through dangerous country because of a debt from a different war. Family, built from broken pieces by choice and circumstance. The next day, Ethan rode into Redemption Creek for what he knew might be the last time. The town had made its position clear during his previous visit, but he needed information. Needed to know what Drummond was planning, needed every advantage he could gather before the raid. The streets were quiet in the afternoon heat. People moved between buildings with the purposeful efficiency of those who had work to do and no time for distractions. Several saw Ethan and deliberately crossed to the other side of the street. The blacksmith closed his shop doors despite the forge still glowing hot inside. Only the Chinese laundry remained open to him. Mrs. Chen handed him a bundle of clean clothes he had not brought in for washing and refused payment. Her husband appeared from the back room, looked at Ethan with dark eyes that had seen too much suffering to judge anyone else's choices, and nodded once, respect, between outcasts. Ethan was tying the bundle to his saddle when the voice came from the alley. Wade, over here. He recognized the voice before he saw the face. Jack Redhawk leaned against the wall in the narrow space between the saloon and the general store, rolling a cigarette with the unhurried movements of a man who had time to kill and knew it. They had not seen each other in 14 years, but the recognition was instant and mutual. Jack grinned and extended his hand. Ethan took it, felt the iron strength in the grip that time and hard living had not diminished. Sergeant Wade, Jack said with genuine warmth, you look older. So do you. 40 years will do that. Jack lit his cigarette, smoke curling in the still air. Heard you had trouble. News travels. In a territory this size, everything travels. Jack's expression turned serious. I have been tracking a horse thief out of Tucson. Trail went cold 2 days ago. Started asking around, heard interesting things. Such as Clayton Drummond putting a $500 bounty on an Apache woman. 200 more for anyone helping her. Jack drew on a cigarette. Then I heard he hired a man named Samuel Griffin 3 months back. Rumor is Drummond's had those letters for years, been saving them for the right moment. Professional gun, dangerous, been asking questions about you. The name sent ice through Ethan's veins. What kind of questions? Where you served, what battles, what you did during the war. Jack's eyes were steady. He knows about Gettysburg, Ethan. Knows about the shot you took. The Confederate captain you killed. His brother. Figured as much. Jack was quiet for a moment. I spent 10 years hunting the men who murdered my father. Mexican bandits killed him when I was 16. I tracked them across half of Mexico and Texas. Found them all. Every single one. What happened? I killed them all. Jack's voice was flat, empty. Put bullets in 6 men over 10 years. You know what I got for it. Justice empty. I got empty. Jack ground out his cigarette under his boot heel. Revenge does not fill the hole, hermano. It just makes it darker, colder. You end up becoming the thing you hate. They stood in silence for a moment, two men who had seen too much death to romanticize violence. Finally, Ethan asked, "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you pulled me out of a river at Antietam when I had a bullet in my leg and water filling my lungs. That is not the kind of debt a man forgets." Jack met his eyes. "I owe you my life. I am here to help square that debt." "That was a lifetime ago." "Some debts do not have an expiration date." Ethan felt something ease in his chest. He had been preparing to face Drummond's forces, alone him and Sarah, and whatever chaos they could create. Having Jack Redhawk in the mix changed the equation significantly. "What do you know about Drummond's setup?" Ethan asked. Jack pulled a piece of paper from his pocket, unfolded it to reveal a rough map sketched in pencil. "Spent last night scouting. Main house here, adobe construction, 2 stories. Bunkhouses here and here. Ammunition storage, separate 200 yards from main house. Smart. An explosion there would not take out the whole compound." "How many men?" 22 guns, not counting Drummond himself. Rotating shifts every 4 hours. Weakest point is dawn shift change around 6 in the morning. Guards are tired from night watch, day crew is not fully alert yet. Maybe 10 minutes where the whole operation runs on muscle memory. "What about the office where Drummond keeps his records?" Jack pointed to the map. "Second floor east wing, office with a safe. Mosler steel, probably 500 pounds. You are not cracking it without the combination or a lot of explosives." "We have the combination." At Jack's raised eyebrow, Ethan explained about Sarah's captivity. How she had watched Drummond open the safe. 34-12-7. Jack whistled low. "That changes things," he paused. "But there is more you need to know. Samuel Griffin is not just hired muscle. Drummond trusts him, uses him as an advisor. Some of the hands say Griffin has been talking about something big, some plan that goes beyond just running you off your land." The pieces were starting to form a larger picture. Samuel wanted revenge, but was also working an angle with Drummond. The question was what, and whether Ethan would live long enough to find out. They spent an hour going over the map, discussing approach routes and exit strategies. Jack had experience with explosives from his cavalry days. Could rig a timer using black powder, a candle, and a fuse. The explosion would draw every guard in the compound, creating the chaos they needed. "When?" Jack asked. 2 days, dawn after tomorrow. "I will be in position." Jack extended his hand again. They shook the grip of brothers in arms. "This squares us, Ethan. After this, the debt is paid." "Fair enough." Ethan rode back to his property as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. The landscape was painted in shades of gold and crimson, beautiful and indifferent to human struggles. He thought about debts and legacies, about choices made in the heat of war coming due 14 years later, about the strange paths that led men to moments of reckoning. When he reached the cabin, Sarah was waiting on the porch. Something in her posture told him she had been watching for his return. "Jack Redhawk will help us," Ethan said, dismounting. "We have a plan." "Tell me." They sat on the porch steps while Tommy played in the dirt nearby and Bill tended the horses. Ethan laid out the strategy. Sarah would have to surrender herself, walk back into Drummond's compound voluntarily. Once inside, she would locate the document signal from a window when ready. Jack would detonate the ammunition storage as a diversion. Ethan would provide covering fire during the extraction. Sarah listened without interruption. When he finished, she said simply, "I will do it. It is dangerous. If Drummond suspects a trap, he will kill you before we can reach you. He needs me alive. Leverage against my father, against my people." Her voice was steady. "This is our best chance. Our only chance." "Sarah, I have been a prisoner once already." She cut him off. "Going back there is terrifying. But living in fear forever is worse." She looked at him directly. "You risked your life to save me. Let me risk mine to save my people." Tommy appeared at her side, then tugging on her sleeve. He spoke in a patchy voice, urgent and worried. Sarah responded gently, stroking his hair. The boy looked at Ethan with wide, frightened eyes. "He is afraid I will not come back," Sarah translated. "Tell him I will bring you back," Ethan said. "I promise." Sarah spoke in Apache. Tommy's expression did not change. He turned to Ethan and said something sharp and challenging. He says white men's promises mean nothing, that they always lie. The words struck hard because they were earned through bitter experience. Ethan crouched down to Tommy's level, looked him in the eyes. I cannot change what other white men have done, cannot make their lies truth, but I can keep my word. Your aunt will come back. On my life, she will come back. Bill translated the exchange for Tommy, adding words of his own. The boy studied Ethan for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Not quite trust, but the willingness to hope. That evening, Sarah asked Ethan to teach her to shoot. Not the rifle which she had basic familiarity with, but the revolver. Close quarters work that might save her life if things went wrong inside Drummond's compound. They set up targets in the failing light. Old bottles from the cabin lined up on fence posts. Ethan showed her, the Colt Navy explained its mechanics. 6 shots, 36 caliber, effective at close range. He demonstrated stance, grip sight picture. Sarah's first shot went wide. Her second clipped the fence post. By the 5th, she was hitting bottles. By the 10th, she was shattering them with regularity. You are a natural, Ethan observed. I am motivated. She reloaded with fingers that barely trembled. Fear is a good teacher. As darkness fell, Sarah switched roles and taught Ethan Apache tracking methods that went beyond what Bill had shown him. How to read the earth, not just with eyes, but with feet, feeling for disturbances in the soil. Which plants could heal wounds, which could draw poison from infected flesh. The Apache philosophy that everything possessed spirit, that survival meant honoring those spirits. My people have lived on this land for 300 years, she said, crouching to examine a plant in the moonlight. My grandfather's grandmother saw the Spanish come. That is how deep our roots go. And Drummond wants to erase all of that for silver. Not just silver, power, control. She stood, brushed dirt from her hands. Men like him see the earth as something to own. We see it as something we belong to. That difference cannot be bridged. They walked back toward the cabin in comfortable silence. At some point, Ethan realized they were walking closer together than strictly necessary. Their shoulders brushed occasionally. Neither moved away. At the cabin door, Sarah stopped. If something goes wrong tomorrow, it will not, Ethan said. But if it does, I want you to know something. She paused, searching for words. You are not the man you think you are. What do you mean? You think you are a killer, a ghost, someone broken beyond repair. She met his eyes. But I see someone trying to save people. Someone building a family from strangers. Someone choosing hope when despair would be easier. Before Ethan could respond, the cabin door opened. Bill stood there looking between them with an expression Ethan could not quite read. Amusement, maybe, or approval. Hate to interrupt, Bill said, not sounding sorry at all, but we need to go over the signals one more time. Make sure everyone knows their part. The moment broke. Sarah slipped past Bill into the cabin. Ethan stood outside for a moment longer, looking up at stars that had witnessed human struggle for millennia and would continue long after he was dust. He thought about what Sarah had said, about who he thought he was versus who he might become. The gap between those two things felt vast as the desert itself. But for the first time in 5 years, he thought maybe it was a gap worth trying to bridge. Inside, they reviewed the plan until every detail was carved into memory. Jack would be in position by 5:30 in the morning. Sarah would approach the compound, at first light, hands raised in surrender. Once she signaled from the office window, Jack would light the fuse. 40 minutes later, the ammunition storage would explode. In the chaos, Sarah would exit through the east staircase. Ethan would cover her retreat from a ridge 300 yards out. Contingencies were discussed. Backup plans mapped. Signals established. By the time they finished, it was past midnight. Tommy had long since fallen asleep in his bedroll. Bill was nodding in his chair. Get some rest, Bill said, standing with the stiffness of old age and hard living. Tomorrow we find out what kind of people we really are. Ethan lay on his bedroll, but sleep would not come. His mind kept circling the plan, looking for flaws, imagining disasters. What if Samuel Griffin was there? What if the explosion came too early or too late? What if Drummond had moved the documents? What if Sarah died because Ethan had involved her in his war? Around 3 in the morning, he gave up on sleep and went outside. Sarah was already there, sitting on the porch steps, wrapped in a blanket against the night cold. Could not sleep either, she asked. Too much thinking. She made room and he sat beside Yern. They watched the stars wheel slowly overhead, vast and ancient and utterly indifferent to human concerns. My father used to say that the stars are the campfires of our ancestors, Sarah said softly. They watch over us, guide us, judge us. What do you think they see when they look at us? She was quiet for a long moment. I think they see two people trying to be brave when they are terrified, trying to do right when wrong would be easier. She paused. I think they approve. Ethan found her hand in the darkness, held it gently. She did not pull away. They sat like that until dawn began to lighten the eastern sky. Then without words, they both stood and went to wake the others. It was time. The preparation was swift and silent. Ethan checked his Winchester, loaded his revolver-filled ammunition pouches. Jack would already be in position, having ridden out during the night. Bill was staying with Tommy, both of them looking worried but resolute. Sarah dressed in her buckskin clothes, the same ones she had worn when fleeing Drummond. She braided her hair, washed her face, composed herself with visible effort. When she was ready, she looked like a woman going to her execution. Brave and terrified and utterly determined. Remember, Ethan said, if anything feels wrong, if you sense a trap run, we will find another way. There is no other way. Sarah touched his face briefly, a gesture of connection and farewell. I will see you on the other side. She walked to her paint horse without looking back. Mounted, rode east toward Drummond's compound with her hands raised high in surrender. Ethan watched until she was a speck against the rising sun. Then he mounted his own horse and rode to the ridge overlooking Drummond's property. 300 yards out, perfect position for a sharpshooter. He settled into prone position. Winchester rested on a flat rock and waited. Through his field glasses, he watched Sarah approach the main gate. Guards stopped her. Words were exchanged. Then the gates opened and she disappeared inside. The waiting began. Ethan counted heartbeats, counted breaths. Tried not to imagine all the ways this could go catastrophically wrong. 30, 40. His old war wound ached from the awkward prone position, but he did not move. Then he saw it. A white cloth hanging from the second-floor east window. The signal. Sarah had the documents. He checked his pocket watch. 5 minutes until Jack's timer would detonate. 5 minutes for everything to go right or irreversibly wrong. The minutes crawled past like hours. Ethan's finger rested on the Winchester's trigger, ready but not eager. He had killed enough men in his life. Did not want to add to that count unless absolutely necessary. 4 minutes, 3, 2. The explosion when it came was bigger than expected. The ammunition storage erupted in a ball of fire and smoke that punched into the sky like an angry god's fist. Secondary explosions followed as stored gunpowder and bullets cooked off in the heat. The sound rolled across the desert like thunder. Men poured out of buildings shouting, confused, scrambling for weapons. Perfect chaos. Ethan tracked the east door through his rifle scope, waiting for Sarah to emerge. Seconds ticked past. She should be there by now. Then the door opened and Sarah appeared, clutching a leather satchel to her chest. She ran toward the east gate, moving fast despite her injured ankle. A guard appeared in her path, drew his pistol. Ethan's shot took him through the shoulder before the man could fire. The guard spun and fell. Sarah kept running. Another guard, this one with a rifle. Ethan's second shot shattered the rifle's stock. The guard dropped it and dove for cover. Sarah was 50 yards from the gate. 40. 30. Then a rider appeared from around the main house, moving fast, intercepting Sarah's path. Through the scope, Ethan recognized the scar running down the rider's left cheek. Samuel Griffin had come to collect his debt. Sarah stopped running, stood frozen as Samuel reined in his horse 10 feet from her. Ethan had a clear shot, could drop Samuel with one bullet, end the threat, end the cycle of revenge that had brought them all to this moment. His finger tightened on the trigger, but something made him wait. Some instinct born of the conversation 3 nights ago when Samuel had revealed Drummond's betrayal, when the man consumed by revenge had shown the first crack in his armor of hate. Through the scope, Ethan saw Samuel and Sarah talking, could not hear the words, but could see body language. Samuel's hand rested on his holstered pistol but did not draw. Sarah stood, her ground, chin raised, meeting his eyes. The conversation lasted perhaps 30 seconds. Then Samuel did something Ethan did not expect. He moved his horse aside, cleared the path. Sarah ran through the gap without hesitation. Samuel watched her go, then turned his horse and rode back toward the burning compound without looking in Ethan's direction. Ethan lowered his rifle, mind racing. Samuel had let her go, had actively helped her escape. Whatever understanding they had reached 3 nights ago, it had held. Sarah reached the ridge, breathing hard, face streaked with soot and sweat. She swung up behind Ethan on his horse, and they rode hard for home, the leather satchel clutched between them, like the future itself. They were 2 miles from the Wade property when Ethan finally slowed the horse to a walk. His heart was still pounding, adrenaline making his hands shake. Sarah's arms were wrapped around his waist, holding tight. "Samuel let you go," Ethan said. "He did more than that." Sarah's voice was shaky but steady. "He told me where the guards would be, told me which path to take. He helped me escape." The implications were staggering. Samuel Griffin, the man who had burned Ethan's stable and poisoned his well and hunted him across 14 years, had actively aided their raid. "Why?" Ethan asked. "He said something strange. Said Drummond had sent him letters. Your letters from the war. Letters you wrote to your wife." Ethan's blood ran cold. "What letters?" "About the men you killed, about his brother." Sarah's grip tightened. "He said Drummond showed him those letters to prove you were heartless. But when he read them, he saw you cared, saw you carried guilt for every life you took." Memory flooded back. Emily had saved all his letters from the war, kept them in a wooden box in their cabin in Pennsylvania. After she died, Ethan had left everything behind. The cabin, the furniture, the letters. He had assumed it would all rot away with time. But someone had found those letters. Drummond or one of his agents had stolen them and used them as weapons, as proof of Ethan's supposed monstrosity. Instead, they had become proof of his humanity. They rode the rest of the way in silence. When they reached the Wade property, Bill and Tommy came running out. Tommy threw himself at Sarah, nearly knocking her off the horse. Bill looked at the satchel, then at Ethan and grinned. "Well, I will be damned. You actually did it." Jack Red Hawk arrived an hour later, his horse lathered and blowing hard. He had a burn on his left arm and powder residue on his face, but otherwise appeared unharmed. "That was a bigger explosion than I planned," he said, accepting water from Bill. "Turns out Drummond had twice as much ammunition stored as I thought." "Anyone killed Ethan?" Ethan asked him. "Do not think so. A lot of burns and bruises, couple broken bones from people running into each other in the panic." Jack grinned. "They will recover. Unlike Drummond's reputation, once these documents reach the territorial governor." They spread the contents of the satchel across Ethan's table. Letters, contracts, ledgers, bank documents, 23 forged land deeds. A bribery ledger showing payments to Sheriff Hayes at $200 per month, Judge Morton at $500 per quarter, 6 murder contracts, including names Ethan recognized: O'Brien, Martinez, Chen. Evidence of 3 decades of crime and corruption, all documented in Drummond's own meticulous hand. "This will hang him," Bill said quietly. "This will destroy him," Jack repeated. "Everything he built, everything he owns, gone." Sarah picked up one document, a contract for the forced removal of her tribe from their ancestral land. Unsigned but dated for next week. "He was going to do it anyway, whether I signed or not. He was going to take our land by force." "Not anymore," Ethan said. That night, they celebrated quietly. Bill produced a bottle of whiskey he had been saving for a special occasion. They passed it around, even allowing Tommy a small sip that made him cough and sputter, to everyone's amusement. As the fire burned low and Tommy fell asleep, Bill looked at the 4 adults gathered around the table. "We did something today," he said slowly. "Something that matters, not just for us, for everyone Drummond hurt, for everyone he would have hurt." He raised his cup. "To family, the one we choose." They drank, and for the first time since Emily's death, Ethan felt something like peace settle over him. It would not last, he knew that. Violence had been unleashed and would need resolution. Samuel Griffin was still out there carrying his grief and uncertainty. Drummond would not go quietly into prison. But tonight, surrounded by people who had become family through choice and shared struggle, Ethan allowed himself to hope. The future was not written yet, and maybe, just maybe, he could help write something better than the past. The celebration lasted until the fire burned to embers, and Tommy's head drooped against Sarah's shoulder in exhausted sleep. Jack Red Hawk stood stretching, muscles stiff from the day's violence and the night's whiskey. "I should ride out," he said. "Get these documents to Prescott before Drummond figures out what happened and tries to run." It is 85 miles to the territorial capital, Bill observed. 2 days hard riding. Then I better get started. Jack gathered the leather satchel, checking that all the documents were secure. He looked at Ethan. This squares us. Antietam is paid. They shook hands, the grip firm and final. Jack mounted his horse and rode into the darkness without looking back, carrying evidence that would topple an empire. Ethan stood in the yard long after Jack's hoofbeats faded. The night was vast, and cold stars wheeling overhead in patterns unchanged since before humans walked this land. He thought about debts paid and new ones incurred, about the strange mathematics of loyalty and sacrifice. Sarah appeared beside him, moving silently despite her injured ankle. You should sleep. Tomorrow will bring its own troubles. Cannot stop thinking about Samuel, Ethan admitted. Why he helped you, what it means. Maybe it means he is tired of hating. Or maybe it means something worse is coming. Sarah said nothing. They stood together in the darkness, close enough that Ethan could feel the warmth radiating from her body in the cold desert night. After a moment, her hand found his. Whatever comes, she said quietly, we face it together. The answer arrived 3 days later. Ethan was mending fence line when he saw the rider approaching from the east. Alone, moving neither fast nor slow, deliberate. The sun was low enough that the figure was backlit, unidentifiable until he was within 100 yards. Then Ethan saw the scar running down the left side of the man's face. Samuel Griffin had come. Ethan's hand dropped to his revolver. Behind him, he heard Bill's voice calling a warning. Heard Sarah emerge from the cabin. Heard the click of a rifle being cocked. Stay back, Ethan called to them. This is mine. Samuel reined his horse to a stop 50 feet out. He dismounted slowly, hands visible and empty. No weapon drawn, no aggressive posture, just a man come to talk. They faced each other across 50 feet of hard-packed earth, the same distance that had separated them a week ago, but everything had changed. The documents were gone. Drummond's power was broken. The game had shifted. You helped Sarah escape, Ethan said. Not a question, a statement seeking explanation. I did. Why? Samuel was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight of exhaustion that went beyond physical tiredness. Because I read your letters, the ones you wrote to your wife during the war. Ethan felt his chest tighten. Those letters were private, sacred, the only place he had been truly honest about what the war was doing to him, what killing was doing to his soul. Drummond stole them from your cabin in Pennsylvania after your wife died, Samuel continued, showed them to me, said they proved you were a monster, a killer without conscience. He paused. But when I read them, I saw something else. What did you see? I saw a man who cared, who mourned every life he took, who carried guilt like a cross. Samuel's voice cracked slightly. In one letter written 3 days after Gettysburg, you described shooting a young Confederate captain. You did not know his name then, but you wrote his brother watched him die. I will carry that forever. The memory came flooding back. Ethan sitting in a tent, hand cramping from holding the pen, trying to explain to Emily what he could not explain to himself. The weight of taking a life, the knowledge that somewhere a brother was grieving, the certainty that this act would haunt him. It had. For 14 years it had. Drummond thought those letters proved you were heartless, Samuel said. Instead, they showed me you were the opposite. You cared about Daniel, about all of them. You just did what you were ordered to do, and it destroyed something in you. That does not bring him back, Ethan said quietly. No, nothing brings him back. Samuel looked away toward the mesa where the last light was fading. I have spent 14 years hunting you, 14 years consumed by hate. I burned your stable, poisoned your well, tried to drive you to despair before killing you. He turned back. And you know what I got for all that effort. What? I became the thing I hated. A killer, a destroyer, a man who causes suffering because he is suffering. Samuel's hands trembled slightly. Drummond was going to kill me after you died, eliminate the witness. I was just a tool to him. Disposable. The revelation hung between them. Ethan understood, had understood since that first conversation a week ago. Samuel had been used, manipulated. His grief weaponized by a man who saw human pain as merely another resource to exploit. Where does that leave us? Ethan asked. Samuel reached into his coat slowly. Ethan tensed, but what Samuel pulled out was not a weapon. It was a bundle of letters tied with string, Emily's handwriting on the envelopes. "These are yours," Samuel said, stepping forward. "They should never have been taken, should never have been used as weapons." Ethan took the letters with hands that shook. Emily's handwriting, her words, the last connection to a life he had lost. He had thought these gone forever, consumed by time and neglect. "Thank you," he managed. "Do not thank me." Samuel's voice was harsh. "I am not giving them back out of kindness. I am giving them back because I finally understand what they mean. You are not my enemy, Wade. War was our enemy. Drummond was my enemy. I was my own enemy." They stood in silence as full darkness fell. Behind Ethan, he could feel Sarah and Bill and Tommy watching, waiting, ready to intervene if this conversation turned violent. But the violence had drained out of both men. What remained was exhaustion and grief and the faint possibility, not forgiveness. Neither of them was ready for that, but perhaps understanding. "I cannot forgive you," Samuel said finally. "Daniel was my whole world. Losing him broke something in me that will never fully heal. I know. But I am tired of carrying this hate, tired of letting it define me." Samuel met Ethan's eyes. "I am not going to kill you, Wade. Not today. Maybe not ever, because Daniel would not want me to become what I have become. What will you do now? I do not know. Leave Arizona. Find somewhere new. Try to build something instead of destroying." Samuel climbed back onto his horse. "If we meet again, I cannot promise what I will feel, but today I am choosing to walk away." He rode off into the darkness. Ethan watched until the night swallowed him completely, holding Emily's letters against his chest like a shield against old wounds. Sarah approached slowly. "That took courage for both of you. Or cowardice, I still cannot tell." "Courage," Bill said firmly, materializing from the shadows. "Any fool can pull a trigger. Choose not to." That night, Ethan sat alone in the cabin reading Emily's letters by lamplight. Letters he had written from battlefields and hospitals and camps scattered across Virginia and Pennsylvania. Letters describing horror and homesickness and the slow erosion of the man he had been. In one letter dated July 5th, 1863, 3 days after he had killed Daniel Griffin, he had written, "My dearest Emily, I killed a man today, a young captain, perhaps 23 years old. He was rallying his men, brave and determined, everything a soldier should be. I put a bullet through him at nearly 300 yards, a perfect shot, the kind the officers praise and the men fear. His brother ran to him as he fell, held him as he died. I watched this through my scope and felt nothing. That is what frightens me most. Not the killing, but the absence of feeling. I have become what war makes of men, a machine for death. I fear the man you married is gone, and this hollow thing wearing his face is all that will return to you. If you can still love this strange that you have become, it will be more than I deserve. Yours always, or what remains of me, Ethan." Tears blurred the words. Ethan set the letter down and pressed his palms against his eyes. Emily had saved these letters, had read them and reread them, and waited 4 years for a man who came home, changed beyond recognition. Had loved him anyway, or tried to until the sickness took her before he could find his way back to being someone worthy of that love. He had failed her, had built walls she could not climb, had pushed her away when she tried to help. And then she had died, and he had fled west to this empty place to die slowly instead of all at once. But something had changed. Tommy's laughter, Sarah's hand in his, Bill's patient wisdom, the family forming from broken pieces of broken people. Perhaps the man Emily had loved was not entirely dead. Perhaps he could be rebuilt piece by piece, choice by choice. The cabin door opened. Sarah stood silhouetted against the night. "May I come in?" Ethan nodded, not trusting his voice. She sat beside him, saw the letters, understood without asking. "She must have loved you very much," Sarah said quietly. "She did, more than I deserved." Love is not about deserving." Sarah's hand found his. "It is about choosing. She chose you. Even knowing what the war had done, she chose you. And I chose to push her away. Then choose differently now." Sarah squeezed his hand. "Choose to let people in. Choose to build instead of destroy. Choose to live." They sat together in the lamplight, two people scarred by loss learning to hope again. Outside, the desert night was vast and cold and beautiful. Inside, something fragile and precious was beginning to grow. 1 week later, a rider approached from the east. But this was no threat. The man wore a federal marshal's badge and carried official documents from the territorial governor. Marshal James Crawford was a weathered man in his 50s with the patient demeanor of someone who had seen too much corruption to be surprised by anything. He read from the documents in a voice that carried the weight of law. Clayton Drummond, you are under arrest for fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, bribery of public officials, and extortion. You will be transported to Prescott to stand trial before the territorial court. Drummond arrived in chains 2 days later, transported by 4 federal deputies. The man who had ruled 3 counties with fear and money looked diminished in iron shackles, smaller, almost pathetic. He saw Ethan watching and spat in his direction. This changes nothing. I have lawyers, money, influence. I will be free in a month. Maybe, Ethan said, but everyone will know what you are. Not a businessman, a criminal, a man who murdered for profit. Drummond's face twisted with rage, but he had no response. The deputies hauled him into their wagon and drove east toward justice. Sheriff Hayes was arrested the same day. Judge Morton fled during the night, but was caught at the Mexican border. 8 of Drummond's men took deals testifying against their former boss in exchange for lighter sentences. The empire built on intimidation and violence collapsed like a house built on sand. By territorial order, the Apache land was protected. Sarah's tribe could remain where their ancestors were buried. The forced removal was canceled. The mining claims Drummond had filed were declared fraudulent and voided. 2 weeks after the arrest, Sarah rode out to tell her people the news. She took Tommy with her, the boy excited to return home after his ordeal. Bill and Ethan watched them go. She will come back, Bill said with certainty. How do you know? Because she looks at you the way Margaret looked at me, the way Emily looked at you. Bill packed tobacco into his pipe. Woman like that does not give her heart lightly, but once given, she does not take it back. Sarah returned 5 days later, but she was not alone. Her father came with her. White Eagle was an old man, perhaps 70, with hair white as snow and eyes sharp as broken glass. He spoke no English, but his presence commanded respect. Through Sarah's translation, he thanked Ethan for saving his daughter, for protecting his grandson, for standing against Drummond when the whole territory had been too afraid to act. Then he asked a question that changed everything. My daughter says Tommy wishes to stay here. To learn your ways, is this true? Ethan looked at Tommy. The boy stood straight, trying to appear older than his 14 years, trying to show he was ready for this choice. It is true, Ethan said, but only if you approve. He is your grandson. White Eagle spoke in Apache. Sarah translated. My grandson's parents are dead. The old ways say he should be raised by family. But family is not only blood, it is also choice in respect and love. The old man paused. If you will teach him to be a good man, to honor both his Apache heritage and the white man's world, then you have my blessing. The weight of that responsibility settled over Ethan like a physical thing. He was being asked to raise a child, to be a father, to shape a young life and hope he did not break it in the process. He thought about his own father killed when Ethan was 16, about all the things he had wished his father could have taught him, but death had prevented. About the empty years after Emily died when he had convinced himself he had nothing left to give. I will teach him everything I know, Ethan said, and Bill will teach him more, and Sarah will make sure he never forgets where he came from. White Eagle nodded, spoke again. Sarah smiled as she translated. He says you saved his daughter twice, once from Drummond's men, once from giving up hope. That makes you family, and family helps family. That night, White Eagle performed a ceremony. He burned sage and spoke prayers in Apache while Bill, Ethan, Sarah, and Tommy sat in a circle. Ethan did not understand the words but felt their power, the binding of people into something larger than themselves, the creation of family from choice and need and shared struggle. When it was finished, White Eagle embraced Tommy, spoke to him in Apache for several minutes, then released him. The old man mounted his horse and rode back toward his tribe without looking back. Tommy stood watching until his grandfather disappeared. Then he turned to Ethan. In careful English, he said, I will make you proud. You already do, Ethan replied, and meant it. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Tommy learned ranching from Ethan, tracking and survival from Bill, Apache traditions and language from Sarah during her monthly visits. The boy was bright and eager, soaking up knowledge like desert earth soaking up rare rain. Bill taught him to shoot just as he had taught Ethan 30 years before. A gun is a tool. Bill repeated the same words, like a hammer or saw. You use it when needed, not because you can. Tommy absorbed the lesson. He was a natural marksman, but more importantly, he understood the responsibility that came with the skill. When he killed his first rabbit for food, he performed the Apache prayer Sarah had taught him, honoring the spirit of the animal that gave its life. Ethan taught him to read and write in English. They sat together by lamplight, working through a tattered copy of Pilgrim's Progress that Bill had carried since the Mexican War. Tommy struggled with the archaic language but persevered. Why is this important? Tommy asked one evening, frustrated by a particularly difficult passage. Because the white man's power comes from words on paper, Ethan explained. Laws, contracts, deeds. If you can read and write, you can protect your people from men like Drummond. You can fight with paper instead of bullets. Tommy's eyes lit with understanding. After that, he attacked his lessons with renewed determination. Sarah visited every month, staying 3 or 4 days each time. She brought news of her tribe gifts of food and blankets, and her presence that made the cabin feel like home. She and Ethan grew closer with each visit, but the progression was slow. Patient, neither rushing toward anything. They would sit together after Tommy was asleep, talking in low voices about everything and nothing. Her childhood in the Apache camps, his memories of Pennsylvania before the war, dreams for the future that felt fragile as spider silk but grew stronger with each shared confidence. One evening, 3 months after Drummond's arrest, they walked together to the mesa overlook. The sun was setting, painting the sky in impossible colors. Sarah stood close enough that her shoulder brushed his. My father is not well, she said quietly. The medicine I know can ease his pain, but not cure him. He has perhaps a year, maybe less. I am sorry. It is the way of things. He has lived 70 winters, seen much, done much. She paused. He says when he passes, I should stay here, with you and Tommy and Bill. Build a life in both worlds. Ethan's heart hammered in his chest. What do you say? Sarah turned to face him. I say, I have been alone since my brother died. Raising Tommy without help. Trying to be strong when I felt broken. Then I met you. She touched his face gently. You are not the ghost people say you are. You are a man trying to be better than he was. That is the hardest thing, and I want to be part of it. He kissed her then, not rushed or desperate, but slow and certain, a promise of something being built between them. When they pulled apart, she was smiling. Is that a yes? She asked. It is a yes to trying, to building something together, to not being alone anymore. Good, she said, because I am tired of being alone too. They walked back to the cabin hand in hand. Bill saw them coming and grinned. About damn time, was all he said. 4 months after Drummond's arrest, mail delivery came to the Wade property. Rare enough to be an event. The rider handed Ethan a single letter before continuing his route. The envelope had no return address, but was postmarked from Santa Fe, New Mexico territory. Ethan recognized the handwriting before he opened it. Samuel Griffin had written. He read the letter standing in the yard, aware of Bill and Tommy and Sarah watching from the porch. The words were simple but carried weight. Wade, I am working as a ranch hand outside Santa Fe. Honest work, hard work, the kind that makes you too tired to think at night. I find that helps. I think about Daniel every day. That has not changed, but the anger is different now, quieter, like embers instead of fire. Your words stayed with me. Start living for something else. I am trying. Some days are easier than others. I met a widow in town, Maria. She lost her husband in the war too. We talk sometimes, not about the past, about what we might build in the future. It feels strange, like betraying Daniel by moving forward, but also like honoring him by not dying while still breathing. I do not forgive you. I may never, but I understand you, and I am trying to understand myself. I hope you found whatever you were looking for in Arizona. I hope it was worth it. Samuel Griffin. Ethan read the letter twice. Then he went inside and found paper and pen. His response was brief but honest. Samuel, I found more than I was looking for. I found a reason to live instead of just survive. Keep moving forward. Daniel would want that for you, I know, because that is what Emily would want for me. You do not have to forgive me. I do not forgive myself. But we both deserve a chance to build something instead of destroying. If you ever need anything, you know where I am. Ethan Wade. He gave the letter to the mail rider the next day. Did not know if Samuel would write again. Did not know if the fragile understanding between them would hold. But he had reached out, had extended the possibility of something other than endless enmity, that he thought was enough. Spring came to Arizona Territory in 1878 with wildflowers and gentle rains. The ranch had transformed over the 6 months since Drummond's fall. The stable was rebuilt larger and sturdier than before. The fences were mended and extended. 30 cattle grazed on the property, 6 horses including Shadow and the gelding, finally named Copper for the color of his coat. Ethan had hired 2 ranch hands men from Redemption Creek who had been quietly sympathetic during Drummond's reign of fear. The town itself was changing. New businesses opening, old grudges fading, the stain of corruption slowly washing away under the cleansing rain of justice. Ethan's savings had grown to $890, more money than he had ever possessed, enough to expand, to plan for a future that extended beyond mere survival. Tommy had grown 2 inches and filled out with good food and hard work. He was bilingual now, moving easily between English and Apache. He could track a rabbit across rock, could mend a fence, could read at a 4th grade level, could shoot a rifle with precision that made Bill proud and worried in equal measure. Bill himself seemed healthier. Purpose had renewed him, the daily teaching, the sense of building legacy. He was 67 years old now, but the weight he had carried since his son's death at Antietam had lightened. He smiled more, laughed at Tommy's questions, told stories of the old days when the frontier was younger, and so was he. On a warm April morning, Ethan was working on the new stable when he heard a horse approaching. He looked up to see Sarah riding toward the property, but something was different. She had belongings with her, saddlebags packed full, a bedroll tied behind her saddle. He set down his hammer and walked to meet her. Sarah dismounted, stood before him with an expression he could not quite read. "My father passed 3 days ago," she said quietly, peacefully surrounded by family. "He said to tell you that you are a good man, that he was glad his daughter found you." "Sarah, I am sorry." "Do not be. He lived a full life, died with dignity. That is all anyone can ask." She paused. "He told me to come here, to stay, to build a life in both worlds." Ethan's heart raced. "And what do you want?" "I want to stay, if the offer still stands." "Always." She smiled, then bright and genuine. "Good, because I brought seeds for a garden and blankets for winter, and I am not leaving." Tommy came running from the cabin, whooping with joy. He grabbed Sarah in a fierce embrace that made her laugh. Bill appeared more slowly, grinning like a fool. "Welcome home," Bill said simply. That night, the 4 of them sat together on the porch as the sun set. Tommy was practicing his letters, writing by the last of the daylight. Sarah was mending a shirt. Bill smoked his pipe. Ethan just sat feeling the completeness of the moment. Bill broke the silence. "I have been thinking about legacy." The others looked up. When Bill spoke in that tone, it meant something important was coming. "I am 67 years old," he continued. "Not much time left. Maybe a few years if I am lucky. And I have been thinking about what a man leaves behind." He looked at each of them in turn. "I used to think legacy was about what you did. Battles won, enemies killed, land claimed, things you could point to and say, 'I did that?'" Bill paused to relight his pipe. "But sitting here watching you 3, I realize legacy is not about what you did. It is about who you teach, what you pass on." He turned to Tommy. "Boy, your parents died. That is tragedy. But you have got 3 people here who love you like their own. Sarah teaches you where you came from. Ethan teaches you how to stand. I teach you why it matters." Tommy listened with the intensity of youth trying to understand wisdom meant for older ears. "That is legacy," Bill said. 3 generations all trying to make you better than we were. Teaching you our skills so you do not repeat our mistakes. Giving you tools to build a better world than the one we made." He looked at Ethan and Sarah. "And you 2, building something together. Not just a ranch or a family, but a bridge between worlds. Tommy will grow up understanding both Apache and white ways. He will be able to move between them, protect his people with the white man's tools, honor his heritage while surviving in changing times. Bill's voice grew softer. That is the legacy I wanted. Not glory, not wealth, just the knowledge that I helped make the future a little bit better than the past. Sarah had tears in her eyes. Tommy looked down at his hands. Ethan found he could not speak. Finally, Tommy broke the silence. In halting English mixed with Apache, he said, I will make you proud. All of you. I will be the bridge. I will protect both worlds. You already make us proud, Sarah said, pulling him close. Every day. Bill nodded, satisfied. He settled back in his chair, pipe smoke curling into the evening air. They sat together as darkness fell and stars emerged one by one. Ethan thought about the journey that had brought him here. From the killing fields of Gettysburg to the empty desert of Arizona. From a man consumed by guilt and grief to someone learning to build instead of destroy. From isolation to family. He thought about Emily's letters now stored carefully in a wooden box in the cabin. About Daniel Griffin Forever 23 carried in Samuel's memory and Ethan's conscience. About all the ghosts that haunted all of them. The ghosts were still there, would always be there, but they were quieter now. Not because Ethan had forgotten or stopped caring, but because he had made room for them alongside hope and possibility. He looked at Sarah beside him, at Tommy, scratching letters in the dirt with a stick, at Bill, contentedly smoking. At the ranch, they were building together. At the future taking shape in their hands. In the morning, work would resume. Fences to mend, cattle to tend, Tommy to teach. A life to build from the raw materials of second chance and hard-won wisdom. But tonight, for this moment, everything was exactly as it should be. Ethan Wade had come to Arizona territory to disappear, to fade into the desert until there was nothing left. Instead, against all odds and expectations, he had found himself, had been found by others, had built a family from strangers in a home from dust. The desert stretched before them, vast and ancient and beautiful. Above, the stars wheeled in their eternal dance. Around them, the night held both danger and promise in equal measure. But here on this porch with these people, Ethan felt something he had not felt since before the war, since before Emily's death, since before he had learned to kill with precision and carry the weight of 37 ghosts. He felt home. Sarah's hand found his in the darkness. Tommy's laughter rang out at something Bill said. The horses nickered softly in their stable. The desert night breathed its cool air across the land. Ethan Wade was 40 years old. He had lived several lifetimes already. Soldier, killer, widower, hermit, rescuer, father, builder. He did not know what the future held, knew that challenges would come, that Samuel Griffin might write again or might not, that Drummond might escape justice or might hang, that the fragile peace they had built could shatter at any moment. But he also knew this, whatever came, they would face it together. Bill with his wisdom, Sarah with her strength, Tommy with his hope, Ethan with his hard-won determination to be better than he had been. 3 generations bound not by blood, but by choice, building something that would outlast them all. Legacy, not land or money or even memory, but the lessons taught, the love given, the hope planted in the next generation. His father had taught him to shoot. Bill had taught him to survive. Emily had taught him to love. War had taught him to kill. Now he would teach Tommy all of it, the skills to protect, the wisdom to know when protection required violence and when it required restraint, the courage to build in a world that rewarded destruction, the faith that tomorrow could be better than today. And perhaps in teaching, Ethan would finally learn the lesson himself. The desert wind picked up, carrying the scent of sage and wildflowers. Spring in Arizona, a time of renewal, of growth, of possibilities. Sarah squeezed his hand. What are you thinking? Ethan smiled. For the first time in longer than he could remember, the smile felt genuine, reached his eyes, touched his heart. I am thinking, he said slowly, that the desert is vast, but it does not feel empty anymore. No, Sarah agreed softly, it does not. They sat together as the night deepened. 4 people who had found each other across impossible distances and circumstances, who had chosen family when isolation would have been easier, Who had chosen hope when despair would have been justified? Four people building something that would last. The wind whispered secrets through the sage. The stars burned cold and bright. The desert stretched eternal and indifferent. But here on this porch in this moment, everything that mattered was present, accounted for, held safe. Ethan Wade had spent 14 years running from ghosts. Now finally he had stopped running, had turned to face them, had made peace with what could not be changed and committed to changing what could. He was not the man he had been before the war. That person was gone forever, killed by necessity and circumstance on distant battlefields. He was not the man who had fled to Arizona seeking oblivion. That ghost had been laid to rest by people who refused to let him disappear. He was someone new, still scarred, still carrying weight, but no longer crushed by it, no longer drowning. A man who had learned that redemption is not granted. It is built, day by day, choice by choice, hand by hand. A man who had discovered that family is not who you are born to, but who you choose to stand with when the world grows dark. A man who had finally, after so many years of dying by degrees, learned to live again. The night was vast, the future uncertain, the past unchangeable, but the present held everything that mattered. And for Ethan Wade, after so long in darkness, that was more than enough. It was everything.